There are sounds that never leave you. For me, it isn't screaming. It isn't shouting. It isn't even crying. It's the low, steady hum of hair clippers. Because every time I heard that sound as a child, I knew something was about to be taken from me, and I was too small to stop it. Before we begin, I want you to know something. This isn't a funny revenge story. This isn't petty. This isn't impulsive. This is a story about years of humiliation, a stolen childhood, and one moment where the balance finally shifted. If you've ever felt powerless, unseen, or deliberately broken down by someone who was supposed to protect you, subscribe, like, and stay with me. Because this story doesn't rush. As far back as I can remember, my mother shaved my head. Not cut it. Not trimmed it. Shaved it. Twice a year. Every year. It started when I was 3 years old. I don't remember the first time clearly, only fragments. The cold tile floor. The way the clippers vibrated against my skull. The smell of metal and burnt hair. And her voice. Calm. Casual. Almost bored. She always said the same thing, this is to prevent lice. She said it like it was science. Like it was responsible parenting. But even at that age, I knew something was wrong. Because nobody else looked like me. I was assigned female at birth. That matters. Because my mother didn't dress me like a child who'd just had their hair shaved for medical reasons. She dressed me in dresses. Bright ones. Floral ones. She sent me out into the world bald and unmistakably not a boy. I didn't look sick. I didn't look special. I looked wrong. Hair, for a child, is more than appearance. It's identity, belonging, safety. She took that from me before I could explain why it hurt. The timing was never random. She shaved my head on the last day of winter break, or the last day of summer break. Always right before school. Always right before other kids would see me. I later realized that mattered. This wasn't forgetfulness. This wasn't laziness. It was placement. The humiliation had to be witnessed. The sound of the clippers became a warning signal. It meant, don't cry, don't move, don't resist. Because resistance only made it worse. I learned very early that my body was not mine, and that lesson would repeat itself in ways far darker than hair. Children don't need to be taught cruelty. They recognize difference instantly. A bald child in a dress doesn't blend in. I was stared at. Pointed at. Whispered about. Teachers asked questions in front of classmates. Students laughed without consequences. No adult ever pulled me aside and said, "Are you okay?" The first day of 4th grade still lives in my chest. I remember standing outside the school doors, heart racing so hard it made me nauseous. I knew what was coming. I made it inside. Barely. I ran to the girls' bathroom and threw up. I thought that room would be quiet. I was wrong. The boys hacked the girls' room, someone screamed. Then another voice. The boys hacked the girls' room. Girls ran out, shrieking. Teachers stormed in. And there I stood. Small. Bald. Exposed. Not a threat. But treated like one. No one asked why I looked the way I did. No one defended me. They just stared. Here's what matters most. My mother knew. She saw me cry before school. She saw me flinch when teachers spoke. She saw me recoil from mirrors. And she kept shaving my head. That's how I know it was intentional. The very last time she ever shaved my head was the first time she shaved my sisters. They cried. They were mocked. People noticed. And suddenly, the head shaving stopped. Immediately. Forever. No lice concerns. No medical logic. Just silence. That's when I understood, it was never about prevention. It was about control. The hair shaving was only the beginning. My mother subjected me to, and allowed, physical abuse. I was beaten badly enough to scar. She allowed sexual abuse from other adults. She allowed schools to break me down further. She didn't protect me. She didn't intervene. Sometimes, she benefited. Silence bought drugs. Neglect bought convenience. Pain bought power. I learned how to become invisible. How not to react, how not to scream. How not to ask for help. Because asking never worked. I wasn't being raised. I was being worn down. And I didn't yet know. There is a moment in some abusive households where something changes. Not because the abuser grows a conscience. Not because the victim is forgiven. But because the victim becomes inconvenient. That moment came for me in middle school. I was taller. Heavier. Stronger. And most importantly, I was no longer easy to overpower. The clippers disappeared after that. Not ceremoniously. Not with an apology. They were simply, never mentioned again, as if nothing had happened. She never explained why it stopped. She never acknowledged what she'd done. No, I'm sorry. No, I shouldn't have done that. No, that was wrong. Just silence. And silence can be louder than cruelty. Because silence says, you weren't worth explaining it to. Even after the shaving stopped, my body didn't forget. I flinched when people stood behind me. I tensed when I heard buzzing or humming sounds. Haircuts sent my pulse racing. I'd stare into mirrors and feel detached, like the person looking back at me wasn't fully real. Trauma doesn't stop when the action stops, it settles in. If shaving my head was her public cruelty, everything else happened in shadows. She hit me hard enough to leave scars that never faded. Sometimes it was discipline. Sometimes it was anger. Sometimes it was boredom. I learned quickly not to cry. Crying only fueled her. She let other adults touch me. She didn't ask questions. She didn't notice signs. Or maybe she did, and chose not to care. Teachers joined in their own ways. Mockery disguised as discipline. Punishment framed as fairness. Students learned they could hurt me without consequences. Because no one would stop them, school wasn't an escape. It was a continuation. Teachers ignored bruises. Ignored fear. Ignored withdrawal. I learned how to sit perfectly still and disappear. I learned how to make myself small. When you grow up like that, something inside you breaks quietly. You don't develop boundaries. You don't develop trust. You develop strategies. How to avoid attention. How to read moods instantly. How to anticipate violence before it happens. I could tell what kind of day it would be by the sound of her footsteps. That's not intuition. That's conditioning. Whenever anyone questioned her, which was rare, she blamed her mental health. She wore it like armor. I can't help it. I didn't mean it. I'm sick. And people believed her. Because believing her was easier than believing a child was being destroyed. My sisters didn't live in the same world I did. They were protected, listened to and believed. When they cried, she responded. When I cried, she rolled her eyes. It wasn't subtle. And it wasn't accidental. At some point, I stopped asking for help entirely. Because asking meant vulnerability. And vulnerability, in that house, was punishment. I stopped expecting fairness. Stopped expecting safety. Stopped expecting love. By the time I was a teenager, I wasn't a child anymore. I didn't get to be. I was already braced for impact, always. Other kids worried about social status. I worried about surviving the day. When I finally moved out around 18, there was no dramatic goodbye. No shouting match. No tearful exit. I left quietly. Like someone escaping a burning building without triggering alarms. Distance helped. But it didn't heal. Even after I left, I still carried her with me. Her voice in my head. Her control in my posture, her clippers in my nightmares. I thought time would erase it. Time doesn't erase trauma. It just buries it deeper. I believed the worst was over. I was wrong. Because one day, years later, my phone rang. And she asked me for help. I hadn't spoken to her in a while when the phone rang. Long enough that I'd almost convinced myself she no longer had access to me. Her name on the screen didn't cause panic anymore. It caused something worse. A tightening. A sensation like my chest was bracing for impact. I answered. She didn't say hello. She didn't ask how I was. She never did. She said my name, sharp, clipped, and then told me she needed help. No context. No explanation. Just an expectation. There was something familiar in her tone. Not desperation. Authority. The same tone she used when she told me to sit still. When she told me to stop crying. When she told me to let it happen. She assumed I'd come. Because I always had. Finally, she added one detail: I need you to cut my hair. The words landed heavier than they should have. Hair. Of all things. I almost said no. But trauma doesn't disappear just because you move out. It lingers in reflexes. In habits. In the instinct to obey before questioning. So I agreed. Her house looked smaller than I remembered. The same walls. The same smell. Something in me shrank the moment I stepped inside. Time doesn't always move forward in abusive spaces. Sometimes it folds inward. She was frantic. Upset. Embarrassed. Her electric clippers had broken. So she'd taken dog shears to her head. She'd carved a bald ring around her hairline. 2 inches wide. The rest of her hair was a hacked mess. She looked at me like I was her last option. This part matters. She was genuinely scared. Scared to be seen. Scared to go outside. Scared of being laughed at. Scared of being judged. As she talked, memories overlapped. Her words echoed things I'd felt before. I can't go out like this. People will stare. What will they think? Each sentence felt familiar. Uncomfortably familiar. She never asked if I was okay. Never acknowledged what she'd done to me. She just assumed I would fix it. Like I always had. I'd brought my own hair tools. Not intentionally symbolic. Just habit. Still. Something about holding them felt different this time. Heavier. As I set her up in the chair, memories poured in. Me at 3. Me at 7. Me at 10. Cold tile, the hum of clippers. Her silence. Her enjoyment. She sat still. Trusted me. Oblivious. And that's when I realized something, for the first time in my life. I had the power. This wasn't anger. Anger is loud. This was clarity. Cold. Focused. Calm. She said, "Can you fix it?" I smiled. And said, "Sure, Mom." She thought I meant saving her hair. She had no idea that the clippers were finally in the wrong hands. She sat in the chair like she'd done 100 times before. Straight-backed. Impatient. Certain. Certain that I was still the child she remembered. Certain that I would fix her mistake. I draped the cape around her shoulders the way she used to do to me. The fabric brushed her neck. She didn't react. I wondered how many times I'd flinched at that same touch. I picked up the clippers. They were heavier than I expected. Not physically. Emotionally. The weight of them settled into my hands like a memory coming home. When I turned them on, the sound filled the room. That familiar hum. My stomach tightened. Not with fear, but with recognition. She didn't look at me. Didn't question. Didn't ask what I was doing. She trusted me. That's the part that still feels unreal. I touched the clippers to her forehead. Hair fell immediately. She tensed slightly, but stayed still. It took her a second. Then she raised her hand and touched her scalp. Skin. Her eyes widened. "What are you doing?" she said. Her voice cracked. I didn't respond. I kept going. My hands knew what to do. She had taught me. Every pass of the clippers followed muscle memory. I wasn't improvising. I was repeating. She started crying. Loud. Panicked. She tried to twist around. I pressed the clippers more firmly. "Sit still," I said. The words surprised even me. She froze. The room went quiet except for the buzzing. Her breathing turned shallow. Her fear was visible now. Embarrassment. Panic. Exposure. The same cocktail she'd poured down my throat for years. I didn't rush. I didn't hurry. I finished properly. Every inch evenly shaved. When I was done, I turned the chair. She saw herself. She stared like she didn't recognize her reflection. Like this had happened to her. Instead of by her. "How am I supposed to go outside like this?" Her voice was small. I met her eyes in the mirror. And said, "I went to school like that." She didn't speak nor cry. She just stared. I put the clippers down. And walked out, and for the first time in my life, I walked away. It didn't heal my scars. It didn't erase my past. It didn't undo anything. It gave me a moment. One moment. Where I wasn't powerless. For once, she had to carry the humiliation herself. No excuses. Just reflection. Because abusive parents rarely experience consequences. They age. They soften. But they're never held accountable. I'm not defined by that moment. But I'm not ashamed of it either. That was the only revenge I ever took. And it is enough. And it was enough.